Good afternoon. My name is Vera Luisa da Costa e Silva. I am a consultant at the Centers for Studies on Tobacco Health of the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation. And I am currently supporting the Convention Secretariat Knowledge Hub for Articles 17 and 18 at FIOCRUZ. This is our first agenda as a knowledge hub. And our agenda is exactly to celebrate the World Environmental Day, that is 5 June, and many countries and institutions and people around the world are celebrating this date. So we are at this point discussing the environmental aspects linked to tobacco, to the tobacco production chain, to the tobacco use. And we have organized this video session with the the International Center on Tobacco Control Governance in Uruguay. We have Eduardo Bianco has joined us in this initiative. And we have invited Thomas Novotny, who is a researcher that studies tobacco and environment for a long time and is also joining us. And I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves to our audience. So, Eduardo, please.
Thank you, Vera. My name is Eduardo Bianco. I'm a technical director of the International Cooperation Center for Tobacco Control and an FCTC Knowledge Hub based in Uruguay. The environmental impact of tobacco, that is the topic of today, is not properly known and addressed. But we know, and that is the key topic for today, that tobacco environmental footprint, together with its negative health, social, and economic implications, make it incompatible, for example, with the Global Sustainable Development Agenda. A recent report from the United Nations Environmental Program found that many important industries, including tobacco, would not be profitable if they had to pay for the environmental impact they caused. As our main goal as FCTC Knowledge Hub is cooperating for improving and accelerating tobacco control policy implementation. And we consider that addressing the environmental impact of tobacco is key for tobacco control. We are very happy for participating in this webinar, for cooperating with the Brazilian Knowledge Hub on this topic, and to have today such an important speaker. I hope you enjoy it and find it useful.
Oh, thank you, Eduardo. And I think that this is the point exactly. We have a number of environmental consequences of the tobacco production chain and tobacco use itself throughout all the chain, from the production to the consumer. And nobody at this point in time is liable for the costs and environmental implications of the tobacco chain, let's say. And that's the reason why we have invited Tom, just to share with us a little bit of his views. I would like Tom to welcome first, and second, to ask you to introduce yourself so we can move on with our discussions.
Thank you, Vera. Thanks very much to you and the Knowledge Hub for inviting me to talk about this issue, which has become very close to my heart and a very important part of my work now that I'm retired from full-time teaching and my duties as a professor at the School of Public Health at San Diego State University. So I have been working on tobacco issues for decades, like you and Eduardo. But it started as many of us, as a clinician. I was a family doctor in a small town, and you realize after not too long a period of time, that you're there at the tail end of much of the disease process, meaning that you're there really to help people with already established illness. And it becomes important to think about the upstream impact of risk factors and lifestyle choices or issues that people have long before you see them. So I got interested in public health, joined the Centers for Disease Control, went to work for the Office on Smoking and Health, which is the US government's chief agency for dealing with the issue of tobacco and tobacco-related diseases. And that became quite a big part of my life throughout my public health career. I was able to work with governmental agencies as well as non-governmental organizations, and had the opportunity to actually lead the US delegation early on in the Framework Convention tobacco control negotiations. Unfortunately, the US has not ratified that convention domestically, but nevertheless, there's a lot of progress that's been made in the United States on tobacco control. My work on the environmental part has evolved from all of the sort of scientific background to really expand into areas where we haven't really thought about the impacts of tobacco more broadly. It's it's easy to understand the health impacts of tobacco. We all know them. I mean, it's
Tom,
well established.
Exactly. What was the reason why you have been? Why did you fall in love with tobacco and environment? What was the driving force behind it? What has happened?
It's a great question. I think, like so many other people, I look down on the street and I see cigarette butts as the most common piece of trash anywhere in the world. And it is true that it's the most common picked up item of trash anywhere. So it's an environmental waste product at the end of its life. But when you start thinking about it, where does that environmental impact start? And you start thinking about the upstream impacts, just as we think about the upstream impacts of health risk behavior after diseases occur downstream. It's important to look at the whole life cycle of tobacco as an environmental hazard. And so I think it really started with just knowing that this is a huge source of environmental waste.
A simple observation that you had butts all around. And how do you feel today having all this device from these electronic cigarettes all around and batteries, and just starting from the consumer's litter, no?
Yeah, it does. But it also,
from the end of the tobacco chain.
It also really reflects on the tobacco industry's lack of any sort of extended producer responsibility. And that starts, again, in the whole chain, way back into the production process of tobacco agriculture. They really don't have a sense of responsibility or accountability for the environmental damage that it does all along the chain. It's very easy to see the cigarette butt waste problem because so many people notice this and it gets publicized in terms of the impact on the beach. It's less visible, that is, the environmental impacts are less visible to most of the public relative to tobacco's impact on agriculture, deforestation, manufacturing, which is a very dirty process. Those things are less visible to so much of the world, the consuming world at least. And then further, the carbon impact of this, which is substantial and has been really carefully worked out by Imperial College researchers a couple of years ago, show that that whole process is really quite burdensome in terms of carbon footprint. So what we don't see, that's important as well.
Thank you. I was looking today into legislation, let's say a piece of a decision from the ILO with the hazardous health labor, child labor processes. And I could see that tobacco is there in many fronts as a very hazardous labor for children.
Yes.
So maybe you could give us a little bit of light on how does this production chain gets into environmental aspects, and how does this result in problems with the environment?
Well, it's starting with agriculture. It's very burdensome on soils. Tobacco plant itself sucks up water, sucks up nutrients, and the soil is left with less agricultural productivity, which has many effects. Starting with, it may displace other kind of crops that maybe people would grow, food crops, etc., because it's a cash crop that is profitable. And so, you know, there's a judgment that small farmers make in terms of what they want to grow that makes it more attractive to get this cash crop. But it's hard on the soil. Lots of pesticides, rodenticides, other chemicals are used in the production of tobacco. It's very susceptible to diseases that need to be controlled with pesticides, and these can be residuals, including things that are prohibited in developing countries, such as DDT and organophosphates. Along with that, you know, the whole production process involves much hand labor. Most of tobacco growing is now done in low middle income countries, not in high income countries so much. It's done at small farms, families, children, childhood labor, where they are exposed to the tobacco chemicals, but also to nicotine, which causes something called green tobacco sickness. In the harvesting process, when you're not wearing any protective equipment, it causes actual nicotine poisoning. And this is still very commonly reported, agricultural consequence. It's hazardous in terms of water systems. The runoff from fields to drinking water supplies has been documented. It's hazardous in terms of the curing of the tobacco product. Flue cured tobacco is one of the more common types of tobacco that are used in manufactured cigarettes. This requires usually wood, sometimes coal, sometimes other kind of more sophisticated curing fuels to heat tobacco over long periods of time. And if wood is used, which is often the case in low and middle income countries, this means that there's an added impact of deforestation for that wood supply, not just for the tobacco plants growing in wooded areas as well. So we have deforestation, we have toxicity due to the chemicals used, we have green tobacco sickness, we have child labor, which is still a significant problem and is something that is not addressed by the tobacco industry either. The farmers who grow tobacco are often sort of captured in a cycle of buying their chemicals from central sources that sometimes are controlled by the tobacco industry, and then the price that they are able to demand for the product is controlled by the tobacco companies, the purchasers, not by the farmers. So it's not a very good marketing system, even for these small farmers. So that gets it started. The manufacturing process, as I mentioned, is quite dirty. Even when they try to make low nicotine containing cigarettes, they denicotinize the cigarettes. Nicotine is a toxic, hazardous waste product in and of itself. It's a pesticide, in fact. And so just the whole process of manufacturing becomes another concern. Very poorly documented. The tobacco industry likes to report its under its corporate social responsibility rubric that they're trying to reduce their carbon impact and reduce their dirty processes, but they really don't report this completely.
I think that the role of the tobacco industry on that is unbelievable. Eduardo, have you ever been on a tobacco growing area?
No, not.
I had the opportunity to go to visit several tobacco growing regions, and I have seen people vomiting and having lots of problems with the green sickness disease. And eventually you had this opportunity as well, Eduardo. Tell us how it was.
No. Unfortunately, I didn't have this opportunity. People from the north of Uruguay, Artigas and Rivera, that are related to growing tobacco, went to Brazil, to the south of Brazil, to try to understand and to see if they could organize an alternative livelihood for Uruguay. Unfortunately, it didn't work here. the government changed and we couldn't continue with this. But I would like to ask to Tom if manufacturing and distribution of tobacco products also have an impact on environment, not just growing and the cure of tobacco. Could you provide info about that?
Yes, this has been studied by one of my colleagues, Yogi Hanlon and Stella Bialas, where they did a review of the externalities of tobacco manufacturing. So when we talk about externalities, these are costs or impacts that are not incorporated into the price of the product, so that those who either make a profit or pay for the use of the product are paying for it. It's actually sort of externalized to either public resources or perhaps in the case of tobacco product waste collection and non-governmental organizations. But at any rate, again, it's very difficult to get the tobacco industry to tell us the truth about their manufacturing process. But what we do know is it's a very chemically intensive process. The manufacturing is quite dirty. Much of this is now being done in low middle income countries as well as the growing, with movement of manufacturing plants around the world. And there's been a good, careful study of these plants just in terms of their distribution. And again, they're moving to places where regulatory authority is less exercised. And so, with that in mind, again, the tobacco industry is not taking responsibility for the manufacturing process. The distribution system, again, this is a global industry. Manufacturing occurs in low middle income countries. The product is going to be exported, distributed around the world. That process uses fuel and has a carbon impact as well. And so those are less well understood, less well reported, and but yet we know that because the industry continues to expand, manufacturing, cigarette consumption, cigarette production is actually increasing. It's 6 trillion cigarettes a year right now, and that's expected to actually increase another, 2 or 3 trillion in the coming decades. So it's a dirty process.
Okay, tell me briefly, is apart from you, who else, people and institutions are currently involved on this discussion? What they are doing for or against this agenda?
Well, certainly the FCTC Articles 17 and 18 are an important consideration, and countries that are signed on to the treaty have to work on these issues. In Article 17, it's trying to find alternative livelihoods for tobacco growers. This is not something that's easily done, although some countries have done so. For instance, Canada, had bought out its tobacco growers. There's hardly any tobacco grown in Canada now as a result of that. It used to be grown there. But aside from some of these wealthier countries, this is a very challenging problem because the analysis of the industry shows that there are profits to be made, and very difficult to find ways of overcoming that profit margin.
The tobacco industry. There are a number of countries where the tobacco industry, and starting by the international project on the eliminating child labor foundation that is so well known elsewhere, everywhere. The tobacco industry has been trying to convey the idea that they are environmental friendly, that they support environment initiatives, and moreover, that they support the broader SDG 2030 agenda in all the different aspects, including in the health aspect. They want to consider that they support the health related aspects. So what are the CSRs, the corporate responsibility strategies from the industry that you would like to share with us? Here in Brazil, we have the BAT and PMI working through the syndicate of industries. the Union of Industries, on projects to grow vegetables, to grow trees, to grow environmentally friendly in the country. I know that in other countries it's the same thing. So what do you have in this regard?
Well, you know, these are all trying to get them out of the spotlight in terms of being environmental polluters. And it's a false sense of responsibility. They really are not taking full responsibility. If they had to take full responsibility, as Eduardo pointed out, for the environmental impact, the product wouldn't be profitable. So what they are doing is taking small portions of this sort of environmental responsibility and trying to, you know, use it as a demonstration of their alleged commitments. But the quantity of, for instance, carbon offsets that they're going to be accomplishing with whatever they do, like electrifying their vehicles or just doing these little sort of, you know, modest interventions, is insignificant in terms of the entire life cycle or the entire supply chain that we've been discussing. The impact on agriculture, the impact on manufacturing, the impact of distribution. So they're making small little pieces of that and trying to make a big deal out of it. But if you look at the totality of their impact, it wouldn't have much of an effect. One of the things that they're doing, Philip Morris in particular, has got this advertisement that says our planet is not an ashtray, which means that they're trying to show that they are going to take some responsibility for the post-consumption tobacco product waste. Well, if they really wanted to take responsibility, they'd stop selling cigarettes. If they really wanted to take responsibility, they'd stop selling the filter, which is a plastic source of microfibers and also non-biodegradable waste in the environment. The filter itself has absolutely no health benefit. It makes it easier to smoke. It's like it's an additive to the tobacco product. It's like flavors, for instance, that make it easier for people to smoke. It has no health benefit and ends up in the environment as a non-biodegradable source of plastics and microfibers. So, you know, in terms of their producer responsibility, they could take responsibility and change the product, stop selling filtered cigarettes, reduce their the waste burden, and actually, you know, make some truth to the fact that our planet is not an ashtray for their products.
Tom, you mentioned Article 8, FCTC Article 18.
Yeah.
How did you see WHO FCTC Article 18 guidelines? Are they updated in addressing the main strategies of environmental threat posed by tobacco? Are there any aspects that you consider are not contemplated in this guideline?
Well, I think that the one that I've been working on most recently, again, is on post-consumption waste. And I think that this one should have more attention because I think that the regulatory and other kinds of interventions can actually have a substantial effect on changing or regulating tobacco products so that they don't end up as waste. Now that includes, you know, manufactured cigarettes, but also things, the electronic cigarettes, as you pointed out earlier. These are already considered as toxic hazardous waste products by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The nicotine in them alone qualifies them as such. They become, you know, a responsibility for communities, schools, or wherever they're collected or confiscated to dispose of as hazardous waste, which has costs. I think that, you know, the other issue, I'm just following up on that, is that there are costs to the post-consumption waste that we haven't yet produced. We're working with, my group of researchers is working with the WHO now and also the state of California to come up with some modeling estimates of the economic cost of tobacco product waste in the environment so that we can look to see how to bring that cost back to the tobacco industry as the responsible party and try to reverse the externalities that are caused by this. So I think that looking at post-consumption waste, tobacco product waste as a focus for Article 18 needs more expansion.
I think that this is an issue with the WHO CTC. because most countries attach Article 18 implementation to Article 17 implementation. And this is one of the reasons why we are separating the discussions on Article 18 from the discussions on Article 17, because countries do not realize that everybody is in Article 18 from the point of view of implement, that you don't need to be a tobacco grower to implement Article 18 of the WHO FCTC. So, and in this regard, Tom, any example from any country that has advanced the implementation of Article 18 agenda? I know the EU has been doing something in regard to plastics disposal. But what else would you share with us?
Yeah, that's a really good point. The EU has issued a plastics directive that says that includes attention paid to the cigarette filter, which is made of cellulose acetate, a non-biodegradable plastic, and it's found on 97% of manufactured cigarettes. So they have issued a directive that this has to be changed. Now, some of the suggestions are to use biodegradable filters, which I think is the wrong answer, because that would actually just encourage smokers to deposit their butts more frequently. It's like a moral hazard. You know, they'll think, oh yeah, it's okay to deposit my biodegradable filter. It'll actually, I think, not serve the purposes of the plastics directive. New Zealand has just published a blog post that I contributed to that proposes banning the sale of filtered cigarettes in the country as part of their approach to a smoke-free New Zealand by 2025. They look at this as a holistic, part of the holistic approach that says, let's change the product, let's denormalize the use of the tobacco, let's emphasize the environment as a reason to do this. And I think you know, that becomes a really good possibility for that country to actually achieve that product change. Here in the United States, we've tried to promote this. Here in California, 2 separate efforts were made in the state of California, the world's 6th largest economy, to actually ban the sale of filtered cigarettes. And it may eventually happen because California has also set 2030 as a smoke-free goal, and to include these kinds of environmental approaches as part of that holistic approach. So I think that there's opportunities for this. I think several countries in Europe are thinking about this as well. Spain has been working on scientific analyses on tobacco product waste, for instance, to also support efforts to reduce smoking in public places, which is another way to try to prevent tobacco waste from being deposited.
Perfect. Great, Tom. Well, we don't have more time, unfortunately. I want to thank you for the excellent response in such a short time, and also to invite you to leave a final message to our audience.
Tobacco use is a full spectrum health hazard, but it's also a full spectrum environmental hazard. And that when we can join the environmental community, environmental advocacy to tobacco control, public health advocacy, I think we have a much stronger case to reduce, eliminate, and become a smoke-free society.
So thank you very much, Eduardo. Thank you very much, Tom. Let's make peace with nature. This is the slogan of the World Environment Day 2021. Let's implement the WHO FCTC. Let's become party to the WHO FCTC for the countries who are not yet parties to the convention. And let's think about the environmental consequences of tobacco production chain, of tobacco use. In the name of the Knowledge Hub on Article 17 and 18, I would like to thank you all. And I am sure Eduardo wants to
absolutely. Thanks for you and Tom this opportunity.
Yeah, in behalf of the Center of the Knowledge Hub on International Cooperation of the Convention Secretariat, and wish you all a fantastic World Environment Day. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.